Morning thunder awakened Edo. Storm clouds obliterated the sunrise. Rain swept the city, drenched people hurrying along streets whose inns vanished into streaming mists. Edo Castle wore a wail of showers that poured down from the sky, rendering the turrets and rooftops invisible from below. Inside her chamber, Raiko opened the door that led to the garden. She frowned at the rain. Today's journey would be wet and uncomfortable, even more so for her palanquin bearers and guards than for herself. As she closed the door, Akiko toddled into the room and said, "Mama, no go." Raiko sighed. Akiko often ignored her for days, and Raiko had to work to get her attention. But sometimes, invariably when Raiko had important business to take care of, Akiko couldn't live without her. Akiko had her sharp instincts that warned her when Raiko was about to leave. Maybe she feared being abandoned again, and her bad timing was perfect. "I'll be back before you know it," Raiko said as she knelt, hugged Akiko, and tried to soothe her. Akiko clung and began to cry. Raiko finally had to call the nurse to peel Akiko off her. She left Akiko with a promise to bring her candy. The sound of her sobs followed her down the corridor. Motherhood and detective work were not always compatible. Raiko swallowed her guilt and went back to look in on Masahiro. He was in his room practicing calligraphy, supervised by his tutor, guarded by one of Sato's soldiers. When Raiko put her head into the room, he barely glanced up from his work. "I have an errand, then I'm going to visit father's cousin," Raiko said. "Be good while I'm gone." "Yes, mother." Masahiro looked so unhappy about being confined to his quarters that Raiko felt sorry for him. But she had to uphold the law that Sano had laid down. "Do you promise to stay home?" she asked. Masahiro sighed, with all the aspirations and impatience that 9-year-old could convey so well. "Yes, mother." Before Sano could resume his investigation, he had an important meeting with the shogun Yanagisawa and the council of elders. In the main reception room in the palace, the shogun knelt on the dais. The mural at his back depicted lily pads and blossoms floating on a blue pond under a gilded sky. Charcoal braziers warmed away the dampness in the air. Sano and Yanagisawa shared the place of honor to the shogun's right. They scrupulously took turns sitting closest to him. Today the privilege was Sano's. The elders, 4 old men who comprised Japan's highest governing body, knelt on the floor one level below the dais. A few lesser officials occupied the next lower level. Secretaries sat at desks off to the side. Guards stood along the walls. Everyone was flushed from the heat except the shogun. Although he was bundled up in a thick bronze satin robe, his complexion had its usual waxen pallor. As Sano and Yanagisawa and the elders discussed government affairs, he grew bored and restless. Sano could almost see the words going in one of his ears and out the other. When asked to approve decisions, he did so automatically, and the secretaries applied his signature seal to documents. The assembly reached the final item on the agenda. "His Excellency's pilgrimage to Nego Toshoku," announced the senior elder. The Toshoku was a shrine in the city of Nikko, a 2-day journey north of Edo, where the first Tokugawa shogun had been laid to rest. Now the shogun perked up. "I've been looking forward to my trip." He normally preferred not to brave the discomforts of travel, but he was enjoying a rare spell of good health, and had whittled his taste of adventures. "When would be an auspicious time for me to go?" The elders didn't answer. Hands folded, expressions grave. They waited for someone else to deliver the bad news. "Your Excellency, sir, I regret to say that I must advise you against making the trip," Sano said. "Oh!" Muffled, the shogun turned to Yanagisawa in hope of advice he liked better. "What do you say?" At one time, Yanagisawa would have contradicted Sano to gain points in the Lord's favor, but now Yanagisawa said, "I must agree with Chamberlain Sano." The elders looked simultaneously relieved and disappointed. Sano suspected that they missed the excitement of political strife, even though they appreciated the peace and quiet. "The trip isn't feasible." The shogun regarded Sano and Yanagisawa with the hurt expression of a child bullied by his 2 best friends. "Why not? Pray tell." Once Yanagisawa would have let Sano say what the shoguns didn't want to hear and suffer the consequences. Instead, he explained, "A trip would involve a huge procession with new ceremonial robes for you and everyone else, plus lodging and formal banquets. It's too expensive." How can it be? The shogun said, puzzled. I'm rich. I can afford anything I want. Sunji crept into his eye. Can't I? Sano turned to acquaint his law with reality. There's not enough money in the treasury to pay for the trip and cover the regime's other expenses. The shogun wavered between annoyance and dismay. We've never had this problem in the past. The regime had been chronically short on funds during his rule, and his officials had often tried to tell him, but it never sank in. Ordinarily, Yanagisawa would have jumped at the chance to blame Sano for the shortfall. He'd have accused Sano of squandering and embezzling the money during Yanagisawa's absence. Sano could have accused Yanagisawa of both crimes, which Yanagisawa certainly had committed in the past. But Yanagisawa wasn't doing it now. Sano knew because he kept a close eye on the treasury. Why Yanagisawa now adhered strictly to the rules was a mystery to Sano. So was the reason Yanagisawa didn't seize the opportunity to make Sano look bad. He studied his one-time foe, seeking clues as Yanagisawa said. The Tokugawa treasury has become depleted over the years. The cost of rebuilding Edo after the Great Fire. The shogun waved away the Great Fire as if it had been a minor inconvenience, instead of disaster that had killed over 100,000 people and led the city to waste. That was more than 40 years ago. There have been other heavy expenditures, Sano said. You have many temples and shrines to maintain, as well as roads, bridges and canals. Remember that you are supporting thousands of retainers, including the Tokugawa army, Yanagisawa said. Ah. The shogun hunched back, momentarily weighed down by the thought of his financial responsibilities. Well, if I need more money, can you just make me some more? It's not that easy, Sano said. The yield from the gold and silver mines have been decreasing. We can't just mint more coins. Much of Japan's wealth have left the country with foreign traders who sell us goods from abroad, Yanagisawa added. The shogun pouted. Then why not just debase the coinage again? That drastic measure had been undertaken 6 years ago, when coins had been collected, melted down and alloyed with base metal to reduce their gold and silver content, thereby increasing the supply of currency. We can't do that too often. It has the unfortunate side effect of raising the price of goods, Yanagisawa explained. Well, why should I care? The shogun said, confused and vexed. Many citizens won't be able to afford food, Yanagisawa said. There'll be a famine. You don't want that, do you? No, but I still want to go to Nikko. The shogun's face took on the peevish expression that presaged a tantrum that would end with him threatening to execute Sano and Yanagisawa. The people need you to take care of them, Sano said. That's your duty according to Confucius. The shogun was an enthusiast of the Chinese sage, whose philosophy had strongly influenced Japanese government. Therefore you must be frugal. A shogun, you're not just a dictator, you're virtually a god, with the power to be generous and merciful. I guess I am, the shogun said, preening at his glorified image of himself in a tone lofty with self-sacrifice. He said, I shall postpone my trip for the sake of doing what is right. Yanagisawa raised an eyebrow at Sano, suggesting that Sano had laid it a bit thick, but he didn't complain. No one else in the room would look at them or anyone else. That's admirable of you, Your Excellency. We must all bow to your superior judgment. The shogun beamed. Everybody else relaxed, but his mood suddenly darkened. What's this world coming to? He lamented. I'm running out of money. I'm so anxious about the future. When I die, what will become of my regime? Don't worry, you're still young, Sano said. But the shogun's demise was something that everyone on the regime feared. When the reins of a dictatorship changed hands, so could the fate of everyone else inside of it change, for the worse. The court astrologer says that stars predict a long life for you, Yanagisawa said. Had the astrologer predicted anything else, he'd have been executed. And Yanagisawa knew as well as Sano that they must calm the shogun down, or anxiety could bring about another serious, perhaps fatal illness. But everyone dies someday, the shogun said, refusing to be soothed. And I seem, destined to go without an heir to carry on my bloodline. This was a constant source of grief for him. How fate has worked against me. No one dared point out that his own sexual preference for men had worked against his chances of fathering a son. There's still time, Sano said, hiding his own doubt. Perhaps you could make a special prayer to the gods, Yanagisawa said. The shogun flapped his hands at the idea. Nothing I do seems to work. I establish laws to protect animals, I build temples. Nobody dared suggest a direct, obvious solution to the problem. And what good has it all done? My wife is an invalid. She was confined to the women's quarters and rarely seen. My only son died. Rumor said that the boy born by one of the palace concubines wasn't the shogun's. And my daughter doesn't seem likely to bear a child. The identity of her father was also a matter of speculation, although not in the shogun's hearing. What have I done to deserve such misfortune? The shogun wailed. Before Sano Yanagisawa could reply, his mood took another turn. Perhaps it's not my fault. Perhaps I've done wrong because of bad advice from other people. His glare accused everyone in the room, then focused on Sano and Yanagisawa. Chamberlain Yanagisawa was giving you the wisest, soundest advice that anyone else could. Lord Chamberlain Sano, said Yanagisawa. He's devoted his life to your service. Oh? The shogun narrowed his eyes at Sano. Then what's this I've been hearing about you investigating a crime that I never authorized you to investigate? The abduction of your uncle's daughter, I understand. Sano felt the bad wind of the shogun's peak blow harder in the direction. It's a family matter. I assure you that it has not interfered with my duty to you. But the case had taken time away from his official duties, and the shogun was a jealous man. May I ask how you heard about the investigation? Yoritomo told me, the shogun said. Sano glanced at Yanagisawa, who frowned as though genuinely dismayed by his son's actions. My duty to you is my top priority, Sano assured the shogun. Should you need anything, I'll drop whatever I'm doing and rush to your aid. So will I, Yanagisawa said. Trust us, Your Excellency, and everything will be fine. Well, the shogun vacillated, torn between the pleasure of indulging in hysterics and his liking for peace, passivity, and indolence. Alright, but if I decide that either of you has served me ill? He didn't need to complete the sentence. Everyone knew that the penalty for displeasing him was death by ritual suicide. Enough of all this business. I'm tired. This meeting is adjourned. When Raiko climbed out of a palanquin in the Shochu Temple district, Lieutenant Tanuma held an umbrella over her head to shield her from the rain. He opened the gate of Kiaichi Convent for her, and she lifted the hem of her robe as she walked through the wet garden in her high-soled sandals. The pine trees filled the air with fresh, resinous scent. The heavy green boughs dripped. The abbess came out on the veranda to greet Raiko. May I see Tengu-in again? Raiko said. I'm hoping she'll be able to tell me more than she did yesterday. Now that Chiyo and Fumiko had failed to identify either of the two suspects as the kidnapper, Sano had run out of leads. Questioning the nun one more time was the only way that Raiko could think of to help him. The abbess's pleasant expression shifted into a frown of concern. Tengu-in is weaker than when you saw her. Today she hasn't left her bed. I doubt she'll talk to you. Raiko feared her previous visit had caused Tengu-in's turn for the worse, but she said, Please, I must try. Very well, the abbess sounded resigned. She knew she couldn't deny a request backed by Sano's authority. Inside the convent was quiet. The nuns and novices had left to pray in the temples or do charity work among the poor. The corridor down which Raiko walked was a dim tunnel that echoed with her footsteps, and a patter of rain on the roof. Flies buzzed somewhere in the building. Raiko experienced a sudden stab of premonition. She hastened towards the bedchamber. She ran through the door, breathless with sudden fright, and stopped. The bed where Tengu-in had lain yesterday was empty. The quilt flung off the mattress. The buzzing was louder here. Raiko glanced around the chamber. She noticed a low wooden table placed in the middle of the floor. A tall square wicker basket lay in the side near the table as if it had tumbled off. Raiko lifted her eyes above them and saw a bare, withered feet dangling. Her heart clenched. Her breath caught it as her gaze traveled upward, and she discovered what had become of Tengu-in. The nun's emaciated body, clad in a temple robe, hung from the ceiling. The stout leather cord of her rosary was looped around her neck and tied to an exposed rafter. The tension had drawn the beads deep into her flesh, which was lividly bruised. Her head had fallen sideways, face bloated and purplish, the lips parted to reveal the swollen tongue caught between the teeth. Flies buzzed around the blood and trickled from her mouth. Her shrill scream blared. The first Raiko thought it was her own involuntary reaction to the horrid spectacle of death. Then she turned and saw a young novice standing in the doorway. Stricken by horror, the novice's face turned white, went blank. She swayed and crumbled to the floor in a dead faint. Chapter 24. After their meeting with the shogun, Sano and Yanagisawa